Kakadosh Boker Tov. I wanted to share with you a beautiful shiur that has to do with Tisha Beav that falls on Shabbat, which is actually going to happen this year. Obviously, we're within the 3 weeks, so it's important just to know this. The Mishnah, and this is what it says over here. The Mishnah Masechet Megillah says, right? Be'elu ameru magdimim velo me'acharim. What does that mean? On the Megillah, we said that we're always going to read the Megillah before the time, and we're not going to postpone it, which means that if the Megillah came out on Shabbat, we don't read it on Sunday, we have to read it before Shabbat. Magdimin, we have to make it preemptive, we have to make it earlier, but not later. But Zman Hatzeh Kohanim v'Tisha Be'av v'Chagiga v'Hakel ma'acharim v'lo magdimin. So here it says that what? Magdimin, what? We don't want to make it earlier, we're going to push it off. So Tisha Be'av falls on Shabbat. We're not going to make it on Thursday. We're going to push it off to Sunday. And the same thing with all the other Taniyot as well. Why exactly? Here, the Rav Vadim Bar Terura brings it down, and it's also the Gemara Masechet Megillah Daf Amud Aleph. Tisha Be'av agdu me puranu lo mekadme. What does that mean? We do not want to come and be magdim the puranut, which means we do not want to bring calamities upon ourselves. We prefer to push it off and not to bring it earlier. We don't want to make things earlier. When it's bad things, leave it later. When it's good things, then bring it on. That's what they always say. So that's what's brought down, and this halakha is also brought down in the Shulchan Aruch. Orach Chaim Siman Taf Kuf Nun Siv Gimel, says the Shulchan Aruch as well. Over here, Hilchot Tisha Be'av, Arbat Tzomot Alalu Im Chalu Liot B'Shabbat Nidachin Le'achar HaShabbat. If these 4 tzomot come out on Shabbat, we push them off until after the Shabbat. And why? Mishabra says that we do not make it earlier. Okay, so until here it makes 100% sense. Now, what happens is as follows. We know that the Gemara in Masechet Ta'anit, Taf Kaftet Amud Bet, says something very interesting. Right? It says, do you know what happens now if it comes out on Shabbat? So the Gemara here is over here, and it says like this. It says, "Hakeitza b'shivat nechtasin lechal v'achlu v'kekul b'shvi shmini u'tshii samuch lechashecha yitzitu bo ta'or." So when did they come and start destroying the Bet HaMikdash? So it says here on the 9th of Av, Tashi, samuch lachashecha, close towards the nighttime. Hitzitu bo et ha'ur, they put the fire. Vayadolek ve'olek kol hayom kulo, it was burning the entire day. Shneimar, oy lanu ki fana yom ki natu tzal le'erev. So you see from here that what happened, that it actually was burning the majority of the day. Ve'hainu de'amar Rabbi Yochanan, and that's what Rabbi Yochanan used to say in Maliyeh hayiti be'oto ador. If I was in that generation, Lo kevati ve'lebasiri, I wouldn't have made Tisha Be'av. I would have made it the 10th of Av. Why? Mipnei sherubo shel Hechal bo nisraf. The majority of the Hechal was nisraf on the 10th. They started on the 9th of Av towards the nighttime, meaning almost the 10th. So if I was there and I would decide the day, when do we do Tisha Be'av? I wouldn't have made it Tisha Be'av. I wouldn't have done it on the 10th of Av. However, though, Rabbanan, but according to the rabbis, itchalta de puranuta adifa. It's always better to go at the beginning of the story. Meaning, if you're going to come and you're going to, whether it's going to be reap the benefits or you're going to start crying for the loss, when are you going to start? Not when in the middle of the losses or the majority of the losses, when it starts, the starting point, whether it's a starting point of the war, right? Whether it's a starting point of the things which are going good in a company, even though it could be that there was only a middle grounds and then later, and that's when everything really started picking up. It doesn't matter. You always go after the beginning. And that's why, right, according to Rabbi Yochanan, we should have done it on the 10th, but we don't. Now, the question that we ask ourselves is, when it's pushed off from Shabbat to Sunday, is that tashlumin? Or is it a chiyuv chadash? What does that mean? Do we say that really we had to fast on Shabbat, but since we cannot fast on Shabbat, so it's pushed off to Sunday, and therefore it's tashlumin. Tashlumin is a payback. You weren't able to do it on Shabbat. You do it on Sunday. Or do we say that it's a new entity in itself? It's something new in itself. Now, why is this important to know? Because it's a Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says, it says, what is the reason why Tisha Beav that falls out on Shabbat, mitanim le'achar Shabbat? It says, B'den haya shiyu mitanim ba'asiri, shebo nisraf, ve'lama b'tshi'i, shebo itchila paranut. Yeah, we already said, really, Be'emet, we should have done it on the 10th, because that's when it burned. So why on the 9th? Because that's over the beginning. So the Or Sameach comes and it says, the machloket between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi is in the Chakidah. What is a Tisha Be'av that's pushed off? According to them, do the ta'aniyot that they're going to do today is zecher lechurban Bet HaMikdash HaSheni bilvad, or gam al churban Bet HaMikdash HaRishon. Meaning it's like this. We know that the first Bet HaMikdash and also the second Bet HaMikdash was destroyed on Tisha Be'av. But when we do it nowadays, is it that we're doing it lezecher both of them, or is it only going to be, right, for the second Bet HaMikdash only? Now, this is the Or Sameach. Remember the Or Sameach, right? One of the Gdolei Acharonim is also the Baal Meshech Chochmah. He comes and he says over here, if it's going to be Chal b'Shabbat, right? So we come and we say that there's going to be a few different nafkaminas. So he's actually going to say, the first Bet HaMikdash, the majority was burnt on the 10th. But the second Bet HaMikdash, it was burnt on the 9th. So therefore, we're saying that maybe it's only going to be on the second Bet HaMikdash, not on the first one. But the Yerushalmi, according to them, that they're saying that also on Bayit Rishon and also Bayit Sheni, right? The Yud Zayin b'Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz, the city was sieged, right? So then they made a gezerah also on, right, al Bayit Rishon by itself. Okay, so therefore, according to this, so that which we say that we don't have to do a ta'anit Yom Shalem only on Tisha Be'av, right? And it says on Yud Zayin b'Tammuz, lo ufke'a ha'ir rak b'sheni, only in the second day, only on the second Bet HaMikdash. Okay, fine. So now the question is, how many nafkaminas can we find? How many differences can we find? What is the geded of this year? Meaning this year we fast on Sunday, which is Tisha Be'av, which is pushed off to Sunday, which means the 10th of Av. How many nafkaminas? So we're going to go one by one. There's actually going to be a few nafkaminas. One of them is going to be to do with a child, that a child that only becomes bar mitzvah on the 10th of Av. Okay? Okay. So Kakadosh, how many nafkaminas are going to be? So one nafkamina is that what happens right now if you have a child which is born on the 10th of Av. So now this year, the 10th of Av is on Sunday. Now, if you tell me it's a din of tashlumin, which means it's a payback, so only somebody that was obligated on the ta'anit on the 9th of Av, so they have to pay back on the 10th of Av. But if he was not chayav because he's not bar mitzvah, so he doesn't need to fast on the 10th of Av. Today he's bar mitzvah, yeah, but today you're paying back for yesterday. Yesterday he wasn't bar mitzvah. So the Divrei Malkiel, on page 6, the Divrei Malkiel, which is up here on the top, he comes and he says, in the beginning he says, like the first side, that really meant that the obligation of Tisha B'Av, which is pushed off, it's a new obligation, and it's not tashlumim. And he says it was instituted by Chachamim lechatchila that it should be on the 10th, right? And why? Because according to Rabbi Yochanan, it should have been on the 10th, yeah? And therefore, in a year which Tisha B'Av comes out on the Shabbat, and you can't fast it, Chachamim came in and said that lechatchila you should do it on the 10th. And therefore, if he grows up, he's obligated to fast. Right? Why? Because he's already obligated, he's already bar mitzvah today. That's what the Divrei Malkiel says. However, though, the Maharsham, which is the next one over here, the Maharsham comes and he says, right, abnusvara, to obligate the katan that he was bar mitzvah on the 10th. And he says that even before becoming bar mitzvah, he's chayav because of chinuch. So he wasn't completely exempt. Even before bar mitzvah, you're still chayav in chinuch. So because of that, we're not going to say that it was just techuya and that's it, right? And therefore it wasn't like he was 100% patur. He was also chayav, but midin chinuch. So the fact that he was chayav midin chinuch, now he's chayav midin medina. So therefore, it's not like he was exempt completely. If somebody was 100% exempt, so therefore they don't have to do it. But if not, right, they would still. So according to the Maharsham, it comes out that it doesn't matter what the reason is, whether it's because it's a new entity, pushed off, tashlumin, Doesn't matter. The second that it was a chidush that he's saying, the novelty that he's saying is that since anyway it was chayav because of chinuch, the fact that they had to educate the children, that right before the bar mitzvah, you already start, teaching them to do ta'aniyot and things like that. So therefore, anyway, they're going to be obligated. Another nafkamina is going to be in the Shutav Nenezer over here on the right, which is going to be to do with the question to do with Dvarim Shebetzina, right? So the Shutav Nenezer comes and he says, what about Shiva Asar B'Tamuz or Tisha Beav that comes out on Shabbat and it was pushed off? If a katan is obligated to fast or not, he brings a Shuta Rashba. The Rashba comes, right, and he says as follows. The Rashba is over here. Actually, this is very, very small. There you go. Okay, Shuv Raiti B'Tshuvat Rashba. So he brings down over here the Shuta Rashba that he says that if it's going to come out on Shabbat, is it permitted to have relations or not? Answer, Nireli she'en noeg bo shum avelut. There's no avelut on it, which means that's right here. She'en shum avelut, which means that they're allowed to have relations on the Friday night. Because we said, Ma'aleh shulchano kesudat shlomo b'shato. Right? So he says, 1 second, during Seudah Shlishit, usually that would be Seudat HaMafseket. The Seudah before the fast is called Seudat HaMafseket. We have it on Tisha Beav and we have it on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, though, it's a big Seudah, right? Understand it? But Seudah Mafseket, it has to be usually one food, right? You have whether it's the eggs, some people have the lentils, some people have the eggs in the lentils, but the bread on the floor by yourself, that's what usually how they do the Seudat HaMafseket. This year it comes out in Seudah Shlishit. So how are you allowed to eat Seudah Shlishit? You know how you eat Seudah Shlishit? Keseudat Shlomo b'shato, like Seudat Shlomo HaMelech. You could have a feast with meat and wine, and you could have whatever you want on this year. Why? It's Seudat Shlishit. So he says, Davelut yishana shane, v'choshken delegamre akru michivu kumasi. He says here, they uprooted it from the 9th, and they put it to the 10th. And it's something which is old. They should have done it anyway on the 10th. So says Zav Nezer, right? He comes and he said, Midvaram nishma she'en asiri mitzad tashlumin. The 10th of Av is not tashlumin, it's not a payback. Ela ma, because they uprooted it completely from the 9th, right? So therefore he says, however, though, according to the poskim of the Ashkenazim, then they have a problem. What does that mean? So basically, this is actually the Machloket Maram B'Rama on page 3. So on page 3, you have 2 halachot here. Number Yod, Sif Yod, right? Im chal Tisha Beav be'echad b'Shabbat. If Tisha Beav falls out on on Sunday, or it comes out on Shabbat and is pushed off on Sunday, you could eat meat and drink wine with Seudat HaMafseket, u'ma'aleh shulchano, even like Seudat Shlomo, be'et malchuto, when he was, right, the king. However, the Rama brings down you have to finish during the day, meaning that you cannot eat after Shekiyah. So according to everybody, you have to finish eating by Shekiyah, but you're allowed to have a mash Seudah Shlishit, like whatever that you want. Everything, yeah? It says here, you're not allowed to stop it even. Right? Okay, but then afterwards he just says you shouldn't be noheg bo simcha, or whatever it is. Okay, fine. No problem. And then you're allowed to eat with your family, you're allowed to say du zimun, it's Shabbat, no problem. See if you touch Shulchan Aruch Ramah. You're allowed all the things. If it comes out on Shabbat, you're allowed in everything. Even relations, marital relations. The Ramah says, it's a sur, and what? That's a minhag. So he says, what is exactly the machloket between them? So you see from here, the yesod machloket is talui in the words of the Rashba. Do you say that it was completely uprooted, right? Which means Chachamim uprooted it on the 9th and they put it to the 10th, right? And therefore he comes and he says, so therefore, and that's the Shita of the Shulchan Aruch. So according to that, on the 9th this year, it's nothing. Which means on the 9th of Tisha Beav this year, it's nothing, right? And that's why we're going to speak about the Shavua Shechal Bo as well, right? That there's not going to be Shavua Shechal Bo according to Shulchan Aruch, right? There's no week of Tisha Beav. Why shouldn't it be their week? There should be the full week before from Shabbat to Shabbat. But there's no week. Why? Because they're going like the Rashba. The Rashba held that this year, there was no Tisha Beav. It's a 10th of Av. And that since anyway in the beginning they were going to institute the 10th of Av, this is the real day. But according to the Ramah, he's learning that it's going to be Tashlumin. So therefore, if it's going to be Tashlumin, it makes sense. It's a payback. So therefore, on Tisha B'Av itself, it's still Tisha B'Av. The only difference is you have to pay back. So what do you have to pay back? You have to pay back the fasting. You have to, but you're not allowed to have relations. It's like Tisha Beav. You're not allowed to, we're going to speak about learning. It's Tisha Beav. That's a machloket between the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. Okay? That's the way that we're supposed to understand the machloket, right, between them. There's also a shoot Yitorlu b'tshuva on page 6, right? Over here, Yitorlu b'tshuva, that he speaks about it. What is the reasoning why Dvarim shebetzina is also going to be noheg on Tisha Be'av shechal b'Shabbat? And there also he says the same thing, right? They used to come and they used to start crying and crying and crying when they were saying the Haftarat Chazon. And therefore we're coming and we're doing it because of Chilul Shabbat. Look over here. Yesh Yitzmoa, we have a question. We already paskin that Binyan Bet HaMikdash does not push off Shabbat because Shabbat is more stringent than the Kedusha of the Bet HaMikdash. As is brought down in the Gemara Yevamot and the Rambam in Chobet B'chira. So why are we going to be mitabel on Tisha Be'av that falls out on Shabbat and Dvarim shebetzina, things which are private, especially according to the minhag of the Ashkenazim that they actually show avilut b'faresti on Shabbat, right, on the Shabbat before Tisha Be'av. And it's a dochak to say that only in the heart em mitablim, right? We found older rabbis that they were crying and crying when reading the Haftarot. You understand? It wasn't just stam like that. So he says, "V'chorani Hashem divrach tirutz maspik, kalom ikra maleh." This is a pasuk. That if they would have come and they would have kept the Shabbat, they wouldn't have destroyed Yerushalayim. And it was only destroyed because they were chilut Shabbat. And that's also Gemara and Shabbat Kuf Yutet Umubet. So the fact that we are mitablim ve'osim tshuva on avon chilul Shabbat, and that is the kedusha of that day, that it's mutar, right, be'ota Shabbat, and especially nowadays that it's mentioning avonotenu de chilul Shabbat, and therefore we're doing chazara b'tshuva, and therefore mutar lefi shu tzorech hayom yom Shabbat. It's necessary for the Shabbat. Just like Korbanot Shabbat is permitted to bring on Shabbat because of the Kedusha of the Yom HaShabbat, so too you're allowed to show Avelut on Shabbat, because when we're doing Avelut on this Shabbat of Chazon, we are showing that it's because we didn't keep Shabbat properly, that's why we don't have the Bet HaMikdash. And that's why you're allowed to even do Avelut on Shabbat, because it's necessary for the Shabbat. So we're crying on the Shabbat and we're showing how be'emet, right, we're really lacking so much, right, accordingly. So according to this, now we actually have the machloke between Maram v'Rama to do with the child that what's it called? That becomes bar mitzvah. If you learn according to the Rama that it's because of tashlumin, so therefore he should be patur. Why should he be patur? Right? Because at the end of the day, right, he should be patur because it's a tashlumin, it's payback. He wasn't obligated the day before. But if you're going to tell me that it's a new obligation and that's maran, so obviously he will be chayav. But even with that, the Shut Shevet Levi, which is over here, he comes and he speaks about Tisha Be'av shenidche halacha l'maaseh. Halacha l'maaseh. What are all the different halachot, right? And he comes and he says over there, the kevan de kavu chachamim. He comes and he says, let me just make it smaller here. Okay. Linyan katan shnasa, right, when you give him a av, he brings on the avnei nezet to be mekel that he doesn't need to do it. The ikar is like a gomer sham that he's chayav, right? Why? Because they say that since they instituted like a ta'anit sibur meikara, so now he's obligated. And that's also brought down in the Divrei Malkiel. So basically he comes and he says that basically the shoot of Shevet HaLevi, Rav Vosner says, the fact that we came and we instituted like a ta'anit sibur, now they're also going to be obligated, right, in the ta'anit sibur as well. What about, so that finishes with the katan, with the child. Another nafkamina we said was going to be with learning Torah on Shabbat. The Rama brings down on page 4, he comes and he says as follows. This is a Rama Taf Kuf Nun Gimel Seif Bet. The Rama says, right, the nighttime is like the daytime and we don't eat and benish mashot, okay, fine. Now the Rama says, V'na'adbu shelo l'imo be'erev Tisha Be'av mechatzot, right, va'elach. So after chatzot on Erev Tisha Be'av, you're not allowed to learn on Tisha Be'av, only the things which are permitted to learn on Tisha Be'av. V'lachen, and therefore says the Rama, over here, Imchal b'Shabbat, if it comes out on Shabbat, En omrim pirkei avot. We don't say pirkei avot in the afternoon. V'chen lo yitayel erev Tisha B'av. And you shouldn't go on a stroll. Meaning, don't start making all these strolls and everything. So the Mishnah Berurah in Sif Katan Yod says, En omrim, hataz mepakpek meod ha'miniat halimud right b'Shabbat. And he finishes by saying that if you're going to learn after Chatzot, you didn't lose anything, right? And that even if it came out on Shabbat. So he comes and he says, we could even be somech al zeh, that even if it comes out during the weekday, right, some people are going to be mekilinan. So now what's the machloket? Again, the same thing. If you're going to tell me that it's tashlumin or chiyuv chadash, if you're going to tell me it's tashlumin, and that's the Rama Lashita to the Rama going according to his opinion, so if it makes sense. Today's Tisha Be'av, you shouldn't be learning after Chatzot. right? Or you shouldn't be learning things, right, which are not to do with Tisha Be'av. You could learn the Midrashim Avecha, things that's what you should be learning the Shabbat. But according to Maran, that it's a new entity in itself, it doesn't work like that. Another one is, what about Shavua Shechal Bo? Yeah, what about Shavua Shechal Bo? So it says over here, right, what's the halacha to do with Shavua Shechal Bo? So Tav Kuf Nun Aleph Siv Gimel, Maran comes and he says as follows. Maran says, Shavua Shechal Bo Tisha Be'av Asurim Nesaper U'Chabes. But now in Siv Daled he comes and he says, right, what happens if it comes out on Shabbat? So the Shulchan Aruch says, when it comes out on Shabbat, that the here it says like this. Let me just pick it up. Here it is. לאחר התענית מותרים לחסר חמש מיהב, אם חד תשעה באב יום ראשון או בשבת, וניחד לאחר שבת מותר בשתי שבתות, בין שקודם התענית בין שאחריו. יש מי שאומר שנהגו לעשות, here he brings a stam ויש. Stam says, there's no שבוע שחל בו תשעה באב. The Yesh Mi Shomer says that there is a minhag to do Shavua Shechal Bo the entire week before, except for Thursday and Friday. Okay? And that's the minhag of the Ramah. So now it comes out, why exactly is this machloket? Where does this machloket come from? So again, it comes out from, right, the Shut Le'odom Natan on page 7 comes and brings down the exact same yesod that we just said. If you tell me that it's going to be Tashlumim, it makes sense, right? Why does it make sense? If this is over here. Yeah, if you're going to tell me it's Tashlumim, it's going to make sense. Why? Because if it's Tashlumim, you have to pay back. So therefore, really, the only reason why you're fasting on Sunday is just to pay back for Shabbat. But Shabbat is Tisha Beav. So the week of Tisha Beav is the entire week. But if you're telling me it's a new entity, it's a new obligation, and that's on the Sunday, so the Shabbat, before, there was nothing before. Everything, the entire week was nothing. So therefore, there's no Shavua Shechal Bo Tisha Beav. Remember, for Sfaradim, Shavua Shechal Bo Tisha Beav is the most important because then you're not allowed to take showers, you're not allowed to wash your clothing, you understand? And all these things, all of a sudden now this week, you're allowed to. The week of before Tisha Beav, you're allowed to do everything. So there's nothing really that you can't do. Okay, and that's why Maran goes the Shitato, that's what was brought down in Avnei Nezer, that it's a new obligation and therefore there's no problem. Now, what about Ashlamat Ta'anit al Yidei Bal Brit? Meaning, what happens if there's a Brit Milah on the Tisha Be'av, meaning on the 10th of Av, on Sunday morning? So Shulchan Aruch comes and he says in Siman Kaf Taf Kuf Nun Tet, he comes and he says like this, Ve'eno Mashlim Ta'anito. So he says, Tisha Be'av that comes out on Shabbat and is pushed off, they wash themselves, they don't finish off. Why? Because it's a Yom Tov. The Biur Halacha says, or even a pregnant woman or somebody that's sick, they're allowed to eat. So you see from here that there's such a concept that the second that they're pregnant or there are things like that, that's it. It's a completely different halacha here. The Sefer Ratz Katzvi brings down the Aruch HaShulchan that he says, nevertheless, we didn't find anybody, right, that's going to do so, especially that the majority of the Sudot anyway are at nighttime, and besides the Tisha Be'av, and even if the Tanit is going to be pushed off. So therefore, but again, he wanted to say that this is all going to be Begeder Tashlumin or Chiyuv Chadash. Because if you're going to tell me now that it's a Chiyuv of Tisha Be'av itself, on Tisha Be'av, it's not like any other Tisha Be'av. Any Tisha Be'av, if there's a Brit, you can't eat. So what's the difference now that the Brit is on Sunday and it's a Tisha Be'av that's pushed off? But if you tell me, right, that it's going to be a Chiyuv Chadash, so therefore it says that you cannot be Mekel, but if it's a Tashlumin, maybe you would be able to be Mekel. Another nafkamina is now going to be Motza'eh Tisha Be'av. Why? Usually we know that there's a lot of different customs, but to do it the Motza'eh Tisha Be'av, right, the Shulchan Aruch brings down in Siman Taf Kuf Nun Chet, yeah, Sif Aleph, he says, V'tisha Be'av le'et erev etzitu yesh ve'echal nisav et shkiat hachamim yom hasiri, and because of that, minhag kasher, you're not allowed to eat meat, you're not allowed to drink wine until the 10th during the day. There's a whole question, is it until Chatzot? That's what the Ramah here says, until Chatzot, or is it going to be until the next day? Says the Ramah, if Tisha Be'av comes out on Shabbat and it's pushed off, mutar le'echol basar v'lishtot yain yom sheni, right, you're allowed to eat already on Monday, you're allowed to eat meat and wine the entire day. But on the nighttime, it's a sur, because of el-velut shel yom. He says, right, aval tisporet is mutar lechule alma, so this is going to be, haircuts is going to be permitted the entire nighttime. So you see from here, again, the Sefer Ratz Katzvi brings down that you could permit even Motzei Tisha Be'av basar in a Seudat Siyum Masechet, even if you purposely came and you purposely wanted to finish for the Siyum, right? Or to come and to get married on the Motzei Tisha Be'av, right? If a person didn't have children yet, and all these things. Now, again, they wanted to say that the difference between them is it going to be tashlumin or chiyuv chadash? What does that mean? If you're going to tell me that it's going to be tashlumin, that it's a payback, so therefore he says when the ta'anit is pushed off, so the 10th is not the real ta'anit, so then you could be mekel on motzei ta'anit. But if you're going to tell me now that it's a new chiyuv, so therefore on Tisha Beav itself, that's just going to be asur, so to everything else should be asur. Okay, so therefore obviously we're going to speak about that. Now there is going to be a question, are you allowed to go on a trip on Tisha Beav that's pushed off? So on Sunday, can somebody go on a plane? Right, here the Ratz Tzvi brings it down. He speaks about it over here, Tisa. It says, in the Sefer Alichot Shlomo brings down Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, that you shouldn't go on a trip, you shouldn't go on a plane, right, on during the 9 days, as long as you can. And the reason why is because nowadays also these things are done every single day, but nevertheless, it's another type of a sakana, you still see a gomel, and therefore he comes and he shouldn't put himself into a safek sakana during these days, right? The 70th Gabriel says, because if you're going to go on a plane, you're going to forget about the avelut, right? But nevertheless, is it going to be permitted if it's pushed off? So he wants to say that if it's going to be begeder tashlumin, right? So it's only on a dinya velut, right? And then you have to pay it back afterwards, but not on everything else. But if you're going to say it's a new chiyuv chadash, so therefore you can. So basically, again, they want to make a differentiation between what's learning about it. Okay, I'll just finish off, right, from a beautiful sefer, which is over here, page 13, that he comes and he says as follows. This is Sefer Oel Moshe, and he says like this. According to that which we say, the Shabbat is the Bet HaMikdash. Okay, now on Tisha Be'av, we cannot eat because of the avelut and the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. So, and that's actually going to be pushed off the what? That on Shabbat, you're allowed to eat like Sudat Shlomo Melech. So what's the reasoning why? Right? So he says like this, that in this Shabbat, when Tisha Be'av is pushed off, but that side of the Churban is considered like a death. On the day of Shabbat, Yisrael, somebody that keeps Shabbat, the Bet HaMikdash is already built. As the Gemara in Berachot says, anybody that has dat, so it's like the Bet HaMikdash was built during his days. So therefore it comes out that the Shabbat is not going to be nifkam, it's not going to be defected because of the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. So because of that, it comes out that when a person comes and they keep Shabbat properly, the Bet HaMikdash is already built in our days. And because of that, that's what we're saying, that it's going to be pushed off from the Shabbat. And we don't do Tisha B'Av on Shabbat. Kippur, we do on Shabbat. Think about it. Kippur falls on a Shabbat, we fast the entire day. We do Kippur the entire day. But Tisha B'Av, no. Why? Because the Shabbat is the Tisha B'Av, meaning that if we actually keep the Shabbat properly, there's no Tisha B'Av. And that's why it's actually going to be pushed off to the Sunday. And that's the reasoning that we mentioned from the beginning. And that's why it says on Shabbat, we're not losing anything for the fact that we don't have the Churban. Because if we actually keep the Shabbat properly, there's no destruction. And we have the Bet HaMikdash built in our days. So that's why it's so important about keeping these halachot. And now we understand the differences, whether what's the exact obligations. So to give a very quick summary, as we already mentioned, according to Ashkenazim, you're not allowed to have relations. You have Shavua Hechal Bo, the week of the Tisha Be'av. You shouldn't be learning certain halachot, even though the Mishnah Berurah says that you do have what to rely on, but the Ramah brings that you shouldn't. According to Sfaradim, all these things are permitted. Why? Because we learned that it's a new entity in itself on the 10th and not on the 9th. It's not just a payback from the 9th to the 10th, but rather it's going to be a new entity. And why? Because of what we just mentioned, that on Shabbat, there's no such thing as a destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. Have a wonderful day.